The Crimea Bridge, also known as Kerch Bridge, is not just a concrete structure. Steel and cables extended over the Kerch Strait. Since its inauguration in 2018, it has become one of the most powerful symbols of the Russian presence in Crimea. A direct, visible, and permanent line connecting the continental territory of Russia to the peninsula attached in 2014. For Kremlin, this bridge is a statement. For Ukraine, it is a provocation. First of all, one must understand what is behind this monumental work. Crimea, a historically disputed region, was annexed by Russia in March 2014, after the fall of the pro-Russian government in Kiev and a controversial popular consultation on the peninsula. The annexation was widely condemned by the international community and seen as illegal by Ukraine and Western countries. Since then, Russia has done everything to consolidate its presence in the region, and the construction of the bridge was a key piece in this project. Over 18 kilometers long, the Kerch Bridge is the largest in Europe. She connects the Russian city of Taman in the continental territory to the city of Kerch in Crimea. This physical connection is not just civil or tourism, it has a decisive logistics and military role. Trucks, trains, military vehicles, fuel, ammunition, and supplies pass by daily. In strategic terms, this bridge is the main land channel that sustains the Russian military presence in southern Ukraine and along the Black Sea coast. Therefore, since the beginning of the Russian invasion in February 2022, the bridge has become a priority target for Kiev. Military logic is clear. If Ukraine can interrupt or seriously damage the bridge, it weakens Russian logistics and isolates part of the troops in the south. In addition, it reaches a powerful symbol of occupation, something that has a huge psychological value for both sides. This symbolic value also helps to understand why Moscow invested both in building the bridge. It was about $3.7 billion invested dollars and more than 4 years of works, led by companies linked to the intimate circle of Vladimir Putin. The bridge was inaugurated with pomp. Putin himself directed a truck through the road during the ceremony, a highly calculated gesture to be present and show control. The message was clear: the Crimea is ours, and we are here to stay. But this same bridge, which should represent strength, began to represent vulnerability. Its importance made her inevitably a target. And Ukraine, even with limited and without air superiority, has begun to look for creative and bold ways to attack the structure. The bridge, with its pillars and submerged foundations, has become the scenario of an intelligence and technology war, where drones, explosives, and secret operations replace conventional battles. It is in this context that attacks on the bridge begin. The first relevant attack occurred in October 2022. A bomb truck exploded over the road of the bridge, causing significant damage. The impact destroyed sections of the road and caused fires in fuel rail tanks. The explosion was widely filmed and viralized on social networks, representing a hard symbolic and logistical blow to Russia. Although Moscow quickly started repairs and promised an accelerated reconstruction, it was clear that the bridge was not invulnerable. The narrative of absolute control in Crimea began to be questioned, and the Russian government was forced to admit the existence of internal sabotage or more sophisticated external attacks than expected. Ukraine, in turn, did not officially assume responsibility, but the message was understood. The attack paved the way for a new phase of the war, marked by bold and strategic actions of Kiev in busy territory. The bridge of Kerch became not only a military target, but a symbolic battlefield. With each attack, one message: Crimea was not forgotten. This new phase of the war also showed how Ukraine was adapting. Without enough air power to bombard large structures, Kiev began developing naval drones, submerged explosives, and sabotage operations commanded by special units. Creativity and the surprise element have become the greatest weapons of Ukrainian resistance, and the bridge, with its watched access and exposed structure, has become the ideal challenge for these new methods. But the October 2022 attack was just the beginning. What would come later would show an even greater escalation in the unconventional war for Crimea. After the first bomb truck attack in October 2022, it was evident that the bridge's safety was vulnerable. Even with the reinforcement of patrolling and defensive measures announced by Moscow, the eyes of the world were attentive. Ukraine had proved that it could reach the logistical heart of Russia in Crimea. And it didn't stop there. In July 2023, a new attack happened, this time with the use of naval drones. Small unmanned vessels, loaded with explosives and remotely controlled, were thrown towards the structure. The attack has damaged stretches from the road and interrupted traffic temporarily. The operation demonstrated the advancement of the abilities of Ukraine in asymmetrical war, using accessible technology to cause real and relevant damage. The most impressive in this episode was the level of precision and the political impact. The bridge, even surrounded by defenses, radars, and maritime patrols, was again hit. Russia once again has been in need to contain the damage and control the internal narrative. Pro-Kremlin blogs, state channels, and political figures have ran to minimize what happened, classifying it as frustrated attempt or isolated action. But the images of the wreckage and the interruption of traffic spoke louder. In August of the same year, a third attempt, this time frustrated, involved missiles fired towards the bridge. According to military sources, the missiles were intercepted by the Russian air defenses before reaching the target. But the mere fact that the bridge is in constant target reaffirms its strategic importance and Ukraine's commitment to keep it under pressure. The purpose of these attacks was not just to damage the physical structure. Each attempt, successful or not, has as its side effect the creation of uncertainty. Civil transporters avoid the route, military trains have to be reorganized, and Russian resources need to be diverted to protection and maintenance. In addition, these events directly impact the morale of troops and the population both in Russia and in the busy Crimea. Then came the year 2025 with a new attack, this time even more sophisticated and unexpected. Ukrainian military sources indicated that a submerged pillar of the bridge was hit with an estimated explosive charge of 100 pounds of TNT. Experts point out that the load may have been placed by special divers or submarine drones, a type of experimental weaponry that Ukraine had been testing in recent years with Western support. The explosion happened quietly compared to previous attacks. There was no fireball or visible smoke at a distance, but the damage was structural, deep. The attack compromised one of the pillars of support, forcing emergency inspections and traffic restrictions. It was a surgical blow with the clear objective of undermining the integrity of the bridge over time, not just visually impressed. The operation was conducted under the leadership of SBU, Ukraine's intelligence and security service, with the support of special forces and military engineers. The choice of target, a submerged pillar, reveals the degree of intelligence and preparation involved. This action showed that Ukraine was no longer just reacting, but leading a meticulous campaign to destabilize the Russian occupation. The impact, according to independent civil engineers, can be cumulative. Although the bridge remains standing after attack, internal damage can reduce its life and generate risks of collapse under specific conditions. With each new train of tanks crossing the site, the risk of a structural disaster grows, something the Russians cannot simply ignore. Days after the pillar attack, a second explosion was recorded. This hit one of the bridge protective barriers, built to contain naval impacts. Apparently, this action was part of a second stage of the operation, or perhaps it was a distraction to facilitate previous sabotage. Kremlin this time opted for almost absolute silence. The absence of official statements reinforced the thesis that the impact was more serious than publicly admitted. Meanwhile, Russian military blogs tried to contain panic among their followers. Some spoke of exaggeration of Western media, others pointed to a Ukrainian psychological war. But the public promise of retaliation made by Dmitry Medvedev, former president and current direct ally of Putin, was a clear indicative that the coup was felt behind the scenes of power. For Ukraine, these attacks are more than military operations. These are manifestations of sovereignty. The bridge represents, for the Ukrainian people, an open scar. Each time she is hit, the message sent to the world is clear. Crimea remains a busy Ukrainian land, and Kiev will not accept her loss as definitive. And while Russia tries to maintain the appearance of normality and control, the reality is that the bridge, its symbol of power, has become a constant reminder that the conflict is far from over. And the next chapters of this dispute can be even more intense. With the attacks accumulated over the years, the Crimea Bridge is no longer just a concrete and steel structure. She turned into a silent battlefield. Each crack, each interdiction, Every new barrier placed carries the weight of a war that is not limited to trenches or airspace. It also occurs under the waters of the Kerch Strait. The Russian answer to these attacks has been a mixture of strategic silence and aggressive rhetoric. On the one hand, Kremlin avoids giving visibility to damage so as not to show weakness. On the other hand, figures like Medvedev promise revenge and reinforce the speech that the bridge is untouchable, a symbol of Russian sovereignty about Crimea. But the repetition of threats without effective actions begins to sound as an attempt to mask real vulnerability. Meanwhile, Ukraine refines its operations. Sources of intelligence indicate that part of the latest attacks involve partnerships with special units trained in aquatic sabotage, as well as tests with long-range submerged drones. There are unconfirmed reports that some of these devices have been adapted with AI to dodge Russian sensors and identify the weaknesses of the structure in real time. The bridge also became a political thermometer. Each attack repercussions not only in the military sphere, but in the international scene. Ukraine allies observe carefully, evaluating the effectiveness of unconventional tactics. Already Russia sees its military prestige threatened. After all, if not even the most important bridge built in recent years can be protected, what does this say about Moscow's ability to maintain control over busy territories? The most recent episode, in May 2025, exposed this fragility in a wide-open way. A Russian military train was forced to stop crossing after detecting anomalies in the bridge's structural sensors. Traffic was suspended for hours. The official version claimed preventive maintenance, but satellite images revealed the emergency movement of engineering teams, helicopters, and surveillance drones on the site. The suspicion was clear. New Ukrainian attack had reached the submerged bases again. The impact of this is deep. Russia needs to keep Crimea, whether with fuel, weapons, or food. Any interruption in this logistics directly compromises territorial control, especially in southern regions, such as Kherson and Sebastopol. Without the bridge, alternative routes become longer, vulnerable, and dependent on the maritime Crimea, which is also under constant threat of the Ukrainian fleet in the Black Sea. More than a physical target, the Crimea Bridge became a psychological target. With each attack, Ukraine reaffirms its position. The 2014 annexation will not be accepted as a consummate fact. It is a constant memory that, despite the time, the status of Crimea is still in dispute. What's more, that Russia, even with its power, cannot completely shield the symbols of its expansion. For the Ukrainians, to weaken the bridge is to weaken the occupation. It is to make every Russian movement more and more risky in the region. It is also sending an internal message to its own population. We are fighting, we are advancing, and we do not forget Crimea. This strategy has kept alive the morals of troops and society, even after years of strenuous war. On the other hand, Moscow knows that he cannot allow the bridge to fall, neither literal nor symbolically. The total destruction of the bridge would represent a catastrophic political defeat. It would be the collapse of a narrative built since 2014. So, even silent, Russia invests heavily in reinforcements. Pillar shielding, increased maritime patrolling, installation of submerged nets, and even the creation of air exclusion zones near the structure. But these defensive measures, however sophisticated, have a limit, and Ukraine seems willing to test this limit. Operations against the bridge are becoming part of a wider strategy. Cutting supply lines, wearing the enemy, and forcing negotiations. The bridge is no longer just one way between two territories. It is the symbol of a war that moves both in the shadows and the light of day. If it falls, it will not be just a structural collapse. It will be a shake in the foundations of the Russian expansionist project. And if you resist, it will remain the most vulnerable target of Moscow's pride. Because as long as the bridge exists, the war will not end. And as long as there is war, the bridge will be under aim, invisible or not, of those who do not accept that Crimea has changed hands.